Esta sesión a la que vamos ahorita, después de escuchar todos los temas estratégicos de diseño, de aspiración, pero también de acción, es para ponernos todos en contexto de, digamos, para escribir, no en blanco y negro, pero con una claridad de cómo fue el modelo diseñado, concebido y cómo lo trabajamos un poco. ¿Por qué? Porque después de esta presentación viene la presentación de Alicia Menéndez, de NORC, de la Universidad de Chicago, y también una reflexión del doctor Gary Darmstadt, que fue parte de la iniciativa y del Steering Committee de la evaluación final. Y luego tendremos una discusión con ustedes abierta. Después de eso habrá una presentación en la que vamos a entrar a profundidad los cambios que se ocasionaron y los mecanismos en dos países con el doctor Wolfgang Munar, en El Salvador y en Honduras, para entender esos porqués, ¿verdad? Como nos decía el doctor Berwick, esos porqués y qué causan que las personas tomen y hagan comportamientos y decisiones diferentes. Entonces es el qué y el cómo, sencillamente, ¿verdad? 30 segundos es la diferencia en un recién nacido que pueden hacer que a los 6 meses que todos los niños presentan una anemia que se llama fisiológica, porque todos la tenemos en esa edad, 30 segundos puede ser la diferencia en que esa anemia no se presente. Y es porque cuando el médico o la enfermera que está atendiendo el parto corta el cordón umbilical casi inmediatamente, hasta en las películas lo vemos, los que no hemos presenciado un parto, sale el bebé, lo agarran, lo medio limpian y cortan el cordón umbilical. Eso se hace en el primer minuto, usualmente. Si todos los que atienden parto cortaran eso a los 90 segundos, la anemia fisiológica de los recién nacidos se disminuiría en los 6 meses. No es nada de dinero, no es nada sofisticado. Hay tijeras, hay médicos, hay enfermeras, alguien está atendiendo el parto. Entonces, ¿por qué tenemos tanta anemia en nuestra región y en otras regiones? ¿Por qué no esperamos 30 segundos más que lo que nos han enseñado, a saber quién hace cuántos años, para esperar 30 segundos más y cortar el cordón umbilical? Este es un ejemplo, como muchos, de que tenemos el qué, pero no necesariamente los cómo, y los cómo no son solo temas organizacionales, sino temas de entendimiento de cómo nosotros decidimos como individuos, pero no solo como individuos, sino también como colectivos, como equipos. Mis comportamientos individuales hacen también que cambien los comportamientos organizacionales y cambian entonces los del sistema. ¿Es un proceso fácil? No. Hay que dedicarle intención, tiempo y tratar de ir contestando 5 o 6 veces los porqués hasta poder encontrar dónde están las motivaciones, los motores que mueven a las personas, además de cosas obvias como tener los medicamentos, los insumos y saber, ¿verdad? Y tener reportes, pero no usar el dato. O sea, hay cosas que son obvias y que son tangibles, pero esto otro, cuando no es tangible, a veces no le damos la importancia que requiere. Entonces, no les repito esto porque ya lo hemos escuchado en la primera sesión de la mañana, las grandes diferencias entre el quintil más pobre y el quintil más rico, y la importancia de este asocio con los 8 países aquí, en grande, las fundaciones, el Banco Interamericano como multilateral y 2 gobiernos trabajando con agencias bilaterales. Importante ha sido no solamente el compromiso para hacer esto, sino también el compromiso financiero, porque los países aportaron el 50% de los fondos que se requerían para implementar. No en especies, como muchos de los que estamos aquí conocemos cuando hacemos proyectos y escribimos proyectos. Era dinero adicional, catalítico, porque es el menos del 1.5% del gasto en salud de los países. Ese es el aporte de Salud Mesoamérica. Y levantó esos 43.8 millones, estos fondos de donación, los apalancó. Las áreas y las poblaciones, las más difíciles, las más alejadas, rurales la mayoría, es el 20% más pobre, casi todas con poblaciones indígenas. Es esto lo que nos indica, y lo decía hoy en la mañana nuestra vicepresidenta Ana María, que fue desde el diseño una iniciativa implementada a escala. No fueron pilotos para ver qué funciona, no, lo que funciona se implementó a escala, pero también se hicieron estudios selectivos de intervenciones prometedoras para ver cuál era la efectividad de ellas y cómo podía entonces también escalarse. Las características las hemos oído en el transcurso de toda la mañana en las conversaciones, pero esto así como para verlo en conjunto de cuáles fueron aquellos especiales elementos que se concibieron desde el diseño. El primero es el impacto colectivo. No es solo que dijimos vamos a sentarnos y colaborar. Este es creo que si a mí me preguntan la palabra de Salud Mesoamérica, como nos decía en la mañana Andrés, yo diría una de ellas es intencionalidad. O sea, hay intencionalidad en la selección de intervenciones, que eso es lo que todos hacemos siempre. Intencionalidad en el presupuesto. Pero no siempre hay intencionalidad en el aprendizaje. En el tema de las habilidades gerenciales y las habilidades blandas de los equipos en relación a mentoreo, a prácticas de gerencia, a temas de motivación, por ejemplo. Entonces, el impacto colectivo fue intencional. Teníamos un solo set de metas, un solo plan, no habían dineros marcados de ninguno de los donantes para actividades específicas y había un solo estandarización, digamos, aplicada a contexto de cómo se iba a trabajar sistemáticamente en cada país. El financiamiento basado en resultados, que tiene esos 3 puntos principales, digamos que esas son, si me permiten decirlo así, las únicas reglas que había en la iniciativa. Era que fueran el 20% más pobres, que fuesen metas que iban a ser verificadas externamente y la contribución de países y de donantes, digamos que esto era mandatorio, ¿sí? Para poder probar qué tan importante es un incentivo en lograr metas, que claro, lo que aprendimos fue que no solamente es el incentivo, hay otros tipos de incentivos que no son tangibles necesariamente, que fueron al final muchos de los que ustedes mismos y en los países han reconocido que tuvieron un gran poder, probablemente más que el incentivo, y ustedes lo han dicho en las evaluaciones cualitativas, de que al principio el incentivo jugó un papel muy importante y fue el primer modelo de esta naturaleza que se implementó en Mesoamérica. Entonces tampoco fue fácil, pero sí fue un factor al inicio, pero no necesariamente después. Las intervenciones costo efectivas, porque es importante que en los países con las inversiones limitadas que tenemos hay que apuntar a donde es más fuerte el impacto esperado, y las promisorias para poder estudiarlas y saber si eran alternativas, ¿verdad? Para continuar incorporándolas. El tema de la asistencia técnica en las evaluaciones cualitativas es un tema también que me lo mencionaron como muy reconocido por los países, por ustedes, por los equipos, porque todos apreciamos la asistencia técnica, pero hubo una frase que decía, pero no cualquier asistencia técnica. Asistencia técnica de consultores que entran, llegan, se van y dejan recomendaciones, no nos sirven, como no nos han servido en muchos años. No estoy haciendo una cita literal, pero el espíritu de los comentarios era ese. Y aquí, como decía el doctor Tapia, había un equipo dedicado a apoyar a los jefes de equipo, especialistas de salud del banco en cada país y a los equipos de país, a los equipos de los ministerios, a todos aprender haciendo, ¿verdad? Pero entonces es una asistencia permanente y en base a las necesidades de cada país. No fue lo mismo implementar planificación familiar, obviamente, en Costa Rica que en las comunidades garífunas de Nicaragua, ¿verdad? O en Chiapas. Entonces, se requiere mucho ese permanencia, continuidad, y no solamente de los temas clínicos per se, sino de los temas gerenciales, de gestión y de organización de servicios que se requiere también. Por ejemplo, ejemplos pequeños que aquí los colegas pueden dar muchos y ojalá se animen a poder comentar. Desde cosas muy pequeñas como ¿para qué nos reunimos? ¿Cuál es la agenda que tenemos? ¿Qué es el producto? ¿Y qué vamos a hacer esto para cambiar? ¿Qué va a salir de aquí para cambiar lo que estamos haciendo? O en algunos países que los equipos pequeños en las comunidades de las redes de servicios nunca se reunían para discutir un problema y para encontrar una solución o para analizar los mismos datos locales. Todo eso es parte de esa asistencia enfocada a la mejora y enfocada a optimizar procesos de atención dentro de los servicios, eliminando pasos innecesarios, pero después de ver, no de sentarnos a preguntar qué paso eliminamos, después de que tuvimos que regresar a acompañar a los usuarios a ver de dónde vienen, dónde entran, a dónde van y preguntar cuáles son los pasos necesarios que hay o dónde no reciben algo que requieren. Y esas cosas que son tan pequeñas son realmente transformadoras. Y si no se hacen intencionalmente, no se puede entonces entrar en este ciclo de mejora y de análisis y de discusión. También en sostenibilidad y escalabilidad lo hicimos intencional, igual que aprendizaje, con elementos que vamos a hacer colaborativos, que vamos a discutir fracasos, que vamos a discutir. Pero obviamente, como hoy hemos visto, hay factores que están fuera de control de todos nosotros. Eso no está ni completo, está imperfecto, pero hubo intencionalidad en hacerlo y creemos que esa es una de las áreas donde podemos y debemos, igual que las otras, seguir aprendiendo con mayor énfasis en tener mejor sistematizado cómo trabajar la sostenibilidad. Aquí solamente para decirles, todos conocemos esto que trabajamos en salud: inputs, procesos y salida. El tema es que nos enfocamos muchísimo en esta parte de aquí, que es qué pasa en medio de los inputs para obtener resultados. Y después de mucho trabajo, y especialmente lo vamos a ver cuando el doctor Munar nos exponga esto, que empezamos a ver más allá de la parte clínica y programática, qué es lo que mueve a nosotros como individuos y a los equipos a nivel organizacional a tomar decisiones y hacer las cosas diferentes y analizar. Y eso tiene que ver con prácticas gerenciales, con el clima de trabajo, lo escuchamos hoy muy bien del doctor Berwick. Y eso no elimina los temas de los procesos, procedimientos y flujos, que son temas que nos competen como profesionales y proveedores de salud. ¿Cómo eso tiene un impacto en tener los resultados que esperamos? Esto ya se los dije. Y las últimas dos ideas que quiero dejar con ustedes es que esta iniciativa hizo el esfuerzo muy grande de incorporar intervenciones no solamente de un lado, no solamente de la oferta, que muchas veces por estar nosotros todos trabajando en los sistemas de salud tenemos tendencia a pensar mucho en la oferta, sino también desde la demanda. Y este abordaje sistémico, entonces, tanto de la oferta como demanda, también nos permitió ver que cuando una persona llega, niño, bebé, recién nacido, mamá, hombre, lo que sea, hay que verlo como la persona y qué necesita en ese punto de su vida. Eso es centrado en las personas y en el ciclo de vida, de ese momento donde le estamos recibiendo y que debería recibirlo, y que cuando se vaya de la unidad de salud lo haya recibido. Esto también fue una transformación muy grande, porque no es de cómo voy a organizar yo los servicios de prenatal, de atención de no sé qué, de acuerdo a lo que los proveedores creemos, sino de acuerdo a lo que las personas que llegan necesitan y que no hayan oportunidades perdidas. Y eso incluye desde asuntos de cómo transportarse de la comunidad, que no tiene, diríamos nosotros, no tiene que ver con nosotros a nivel de adentro de una unidad de salud, pero si no pueden llegar tampoco van a tener acceso, o si nosotros no podemos salir y llegar donde ellos. Entonces es una red completa de todos los elementos necesarios para eso. El doctor nos habló mucho de los ciclos de mejora, por eso lo paso. Y decirles, para nosotros, las cinco de los temas que han sido muy importantes y que los recogemos también de las evaluaciones cualitativas que se hicieron con todos los equipos en más de 1000 unidades de salud y con usuarios y personas de la comunidad. El tema del impacto a gran escala, sin olvidar que hay asuntos que deben estudiarse, continuando estudiándose en pequeños pilotos para después expandirlos. El tema del enfoque sistémico, no trabajar solo en un nivel, sino en los 3 niveles, porque los 3 tienen algo que aportar si queremos lograr el resultado. Si el nivel central no aporta la normativa, el nivel local no puede implementarla. El enfoque en resultados y no en productividad. Y sobre todo este número 4, que yo creo que todos lo hemos tomado en nuestro corazón, acerca del empoderamiento, del desarrollo de las capacidades y de la toma de decisión local, con datos que ya no fueron más para reporte, sino para uso ahí local, entendiendo que el enfoque sistémico es para que también los niveles centrales y subregionales levanten las barreras que les corresponde levantar, porque el nivel local no puede levantarlas todas ni corregirlas todas. Y la última, que creo que es la más emocionante, pero también la más desafiante, es cómo aprender, cómo sistematizar esas maneras de aprender cuando el contexto tiene que dirigir esto, y la dinámica de los cambios de normas, de cambios políticos, de temas económicos y de temas propios de los sistemas de salud, y cómo adaptarse y cómo tener estos procesos iterativos de mejora, ¿verdad? Los equipos lo saben que no se necesitaron estudios grandísimos para resultar en herramientas o en innovaciones, sino que es la prueba ahí a nivel local con ayudas para mejorarlos, eso sí, ¿verdad? Para sistematizarlo, para eficientarlo, pero fueron pruebas de probar ahorita, equivocarse, volver a probar, volver a hacer el instrumento, volver a ir a la comunidad, hasta que en cortos tiempos, 2 o 3 meses, tenían algo que ya era una innovación. Los queremos dejar a todos con estos mensajes que han surgido de nuestras propias conversaciones, sobre todo para ver cómo esto podemos continuar aplicándolo y sobre todo sosteniendo estas ganancias y haciendo escala en nuestros países. Gracias.
Y ahora invitamos a la tarima Sebastián Bauhoff, economista principal de salud del BID.
Thank you, everyone. And first of all, congratulations to the SMI team and the collaborators and counterparts on this really important milestone. It's interesting to see SMI, this sort of long and complicated journey with lots of learning that continues, and that's, of course, the theme of this session right now. Before I get started with that, I wanted to make one broad observation that Don Berwick touched on a little bit earlier, which is that we talk a lot about why we should invest more in primary care and why we should do more. But I think SMI really takes serious the challenge of how to do it. Now, it's a messy and complicated problem, but it's interesting that SMI did not shy away from actually tackling that reality and study and show how we actually make improvements. And so I think there's lots of learnings that we'll hear about today. But also lots of learnings going forward. In many ways, I think it's just a milestone and one part in this journey, both with regards to how this all works and also what the impacts and effects might be of this approach. Now, I would like to pick up on 2 points that Emma and Don mentioned and reflect very briefly on how these characteristics of SMI matter for the purposes of evaluating the initiative. The first is that SMI took seriously the reality that health systems are complicated and complex and messy and have complicated and complex challenges. I think there's a couple of examples that you already heard from Emma just now, that SMI works backwards from the outcomes to the problems, looks for root causes that underlie these challenges in improving service delivery and quality of care, and also to consider the macro, meso, and micro of the health system. The second is that SMI also takes the context very seriously, and that includes understanding and adapting to local and national systems to understand their specific challenges and their specific starting points as well. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model, but rather more focused on processes and innovation rather than rigid implementation. So flexible systems approach that adapts to the context. And so what does it mean for actually evaluating SMI? Now, in a typical impact evaluation or typical problem in causal inference, think about a randomized controlled trial, maybe in medicine as a gold standard of this methodology. We work in a very controlled environment and we measure the impact of a standardized and well-defined intervention, very specific intervention ideally. And we look at a small and well-defined set of outcomes. Now, once we do this, we also like to know actually what causes the effect of a particular treatment or intervention, so we can also look for systematic patterns and the data that tell us about these mechanisms. With SMI, all of that is a big challenge. There's a general approach, as Emma presented, this big piece also, that's the black box, of course, but a general approach and philosophy to the initiative. But there's not a single or standardized intervention, and that's on purpose, of course. That's the idea of it. Rather, it's a complex approach that varies by the context. The activities might be different in different places depending on what their starting points are and their specific challenges. So it's not a standardized intervention. It's the mechanisms through which SMI achieves impacts or doesn't achieve impacts also are different, and they would be very hard to detect in aggregate data. And then lastly, what about outcomes? We heard there are some key indicators that the initiative put forward, partly to clarify goals and to disperse incentives and all that. But SMI also transforms health systems overall and tries to change the mindsets and the attitudes, just like Don Berwick outlined earlier. So there are potentially lots of unmeasured and maybe unmeasurable impacts that the initiative might have. How would you measure whether somebody changed their attitude, not just with regards to what SMI is trying to do, but maybe more broadly? So SMI is a really complicated beast to evaluate. And for that reason, we need multiple approaches like the quantitative and qualitative work that we'll hear about in a moment. And like Don Berwick said, a broader lens to actually understand what the impacts are on a systemic level. So as I said at the beginning, SMI is a sort of a learning journey in itself, and what Alicia will present of what worked and what didn't is going to be very helpful. I think there's more questions to be asked following that. Why did it work? Why did it not work? What can we learn from variations, like Don Berwick said? But I think there's also an important learning from the implementation of SMI and the activities, and to understand how change actually happens or doesn't happen. So with that, let me turn over to Alicia Menéndez, who is a professor at the University of Chicago and a senior research fellow at NORC. Alicia.
Thank you very much for the introduction. We have a lot to share with you. I'm delighted to be here. Encantadísima de compartir con ustedes un poquito de lo que encontramos, a little bit of what we got. It has been a challenge. This is how I'm going to start presenting a little bit of the context, a little bit of the timeline and the data that we have. The limitations of this evaluation. This is a very complicated evaluation. What worked and why? When we managed to find out what didn't work all that well, and the challenges and the lessons, and a summary and conclusions and a way to move forward. By now you know this very well, because we have been told this, but I want to emphasize something about the funding. Emma mentioned this, and Bill Gates mentioned this. The average finding is around $2 million per country per year. I'm not going to minimize how much $2 million is, but in the scope of health systems, it's not a huge investment. And we are going to see a lot of results that come from, obviously this was not distributed evenly across the countries in every year, but I'm giving you the average. Other things that are extremely important in our evaluations, the work was in the health system, with the policymaker up there to the front midwife that is in the health center in the community. Where did the initiative start? The initiative started at very low levels, at the baseline. For example, the management of obstetric complications, according to guidelines, was only 25% across countries. Keep in mind that I'm referring to the bottom 20% of the population. Postpartum checkups within the first week, only 40%. But there was a large variance across countries, within countries, and across indicators. So it makes thinking about an initiative very difficult. Institutional deliveries were 98% in Belize, but they were only 13 in Guatemala, very different context. Even within countries, in El Salvador, 90% of the women had at least 4 antenatal care visits, but only 13% of the new moms were bringing the baby back in the first week. So this disparity makes challenges and makes you think about adapting and thinking about context all the time. Let me tell you the data I'm going to use, that we already use, to create the findings that I'm going to share with you. We have a baseline, a quantitative baseline in 2013 that went to households, I'll keep on telling you, and health facilities. Oh, it's back. Then after this, there was a period that I tend to call the first phase, when Salud Mesoamérica tried to get the system ready. I'm going to talk more about that, because this is a key phase that I didn't hear much comments about this early this morning, but it's important. At the end of that, there was a first follow-up, only went to health facilities. Then we have the second operation. Again, at the end of the second operation, different timing depending on the country. We have household visits and health facilities visits. And for some countries, there was a third operation. Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and Belize had that. And at the end of that third operation, again, there were visits to households and health facilities. Keep in mind also that in that third operation, we had COVID. Who could forget that, right? At the end, we collected a lot of qualitative data. NORC was introduced to this evaluation at the end of 23. Emma called us and said, okay, I want a good summative final evaluation. We said we are on it. And we went to Belize, to Honduras, to El Salvador, collected data, and I'm going to show you that. What are the topics that were requested? Tell me about the impact that Salud Mesoamérica had on different indicators, this life cycle, pregnancies, delivery, neonatal care, child health. We look at that. What was the influence of Salud Mesoamérica on coverage, on access for people, on that demand side that Emma was talking about? How about the quality of the care that we receive? How the system was working? What happened with COVID? So we try to answer these questions. But also we try to answer what were those components that work well in Salud Mesoamérica. What was more important? Was everything important? So we look at the components one by one, and also we look at the role that the IDB had in this initiative. Finally, we look a little bit at the sustainability of these interventions. We had a lot of data to do that, quantitative data, all the data that I was showing you that it was collected over time, is what I call the pre-post trend data or the time series data. We have that for all the countries. But for some countries, we also have comparison data. Comparison data allowed us to do some other things. In Honduras, in Mexico, in Chiapas, Mexico, in Guatemala, Nicaragua, we have that data. We also have qualitative data, a lot of key informant interviews in Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador with people from the Ministries of Health. Maybe some of you were answering, I'm sure some of you were answering some of our interviews. We created focus groups with the moms, with the family of the moms, with the midwives, with the community health workers, many of them. I'll show you in a moment. And we also conducted all these things together in a mixed methods approach, and we had, in some particular cases, studies with a framework that we call the context, it's called the context mechanism outcome framework. In the case of Belize, focusing on delivery care with quality, and in the case of Honduras, was about antenatal care with quality. So this is the roadmap. When I say that it was a lot of data, believe me, more than 50,000 interviews in households with a lot of questions about mothers and children were analyzed. These health facilities, more than 1,100 of them. Qualitative data, hours and hours of qualitative data. We have 73 key informant interviews and 27 focus groups discussions. So what I'm going to show is based on this information. Evaluations have limitations. Data has limitations. We need to understand what those are. So let me tell you some of the limitations that we have here, depending on the type of data. We use all the possible resources to have a complete answer to what was happening. The time trends. What is the advantage of the time trends. We have time trends for all these countries, for all the indicators. They are easy to understand. Here, for example, I'm showing antenatal care in areas, in SMI areas in Belize, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua, and how they evolve over time, baseline, second operation, and third operation, as you can see there. We have the number of, the percentage of women that went for the first visit, antenatal care visit, in their first trimester of pregnancy, the percentage of those that had at least 4 visits, and the percentage of those that went and received a complete quality level care with all the different measurements that are supposed to happen. So you have the evaluation of these indicators over time. This is great. This gives us an interesting picture. One of the limitations that it has is, well, this is the historic evolution of these things. I don't know if this is because Salud Mesoamérica. Why? Because I don't see what would have happened without Salud Mesoamérica. But it's giving us some idea. If this goes down, maybe it's because Salud Mesoamérica did something wrong. Or maybe it went down much less than what it would have done without Salud Mesoamérica. So, in some, something that I don't want to forget, Diego is going to be upset if I forget. Always remember that right before that measurement, at the third follow-up, at the end of the third operation, we had COVID. So that was an impact for everyone, everywhere, and the health systems, of course. Let me keep on going. Some countries have comparison groups, and this is great. The amount of data that Salud Mesoamérica collected and we were able to analyze is unusual. This is not normal. To have all this is really fabulous because allowed us to learn a lot about what happens, and it's not usually the case. In the places where we have these comparison areas are very similar to the places, the municipalities where Salud Mesoamérica was working, but didn't have Salud Mesoamérica. When we look at this comparison, I know that the difference, using some statistical methodology, I know that the difference can be attributed to Salud Mesoamérica. So this is ideal. If we do that, for example, when we look at obstetric complications and the management that they had, if it's according to norms, we see, I'm giving you numbers for Honduras and Nicaragua, that in the places where Salud Mesoamérica took place, they were 15 percentage points better than in the places where Salud Mesoamérica was not. That is a big effect that we can isolate. Now, this effect could have been even bigger. This is a long initiative. Many years went by, and guess what happened, since God? The good practices in places that were Salud Mesoamérica sometimes were extended to places where Salud Mesoamérica was not initially included. Some other things could have happened, like the United Nations programs introduce some program in these comparison areas. So we may be underestimating a little bit the impact there. There were some particular cases we could do a little bit of work with this. For example, we knew that some comparison municipalities in Chiapas and Nicaragua were sharing the same hospital that the Salud Mesoamérica municipalities were using. If we exclude those municipalities, we see effects going up and becoming more significant. So that's good news, but keep that in mind. We also have qualitative data, lots of it. The qualitative data is available for Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras. Qualitative data is different from this population-based data that I have with the quantitative. It doesn't try to be representative. It tries to bring us the experience that these people had, trying to understand why things, for whom things work, when they were, what is the context, a lot of more detail rather than just telling you it went up or it went down and how much. The qualitative information is also not only available for the indicators, but also to explain what happened during COVID in these places and about sustainability questions as well. Let's start with what worked very well. In general, the indicators we can divide it between coverage indicators and quality indicators. We see a very strong improvement in quality of care, and it was intentional, definitely. In general, countries show improvement in antenatal care with quality, delivery with quality, newborn care with quality, and obstetric and neonatal complications according to the norms. You can see there, this is just giving you the time series of how in Honduras, the routine newborn care with quality improved over time, very, very large improvement, and the management of neonatal complications as well. That has the possibility of doing it with the comparison area, and that change is 49 something percentage points better in Salud Mesoamérica areas than in the comparison areas. So it's very, very large. The reasons for improvement that comes from our qualitative work, training, the technical assistance did matter, and it was useful technical assistance. Standardization of procedures. There was a different way to start operating in all this care. The organization of the workspace was important, and following protocols. So all this systematization seemed to have been very, very useful. Another example, Belize. Delivery care with quality increased from 35% to 95% from baseline to third operation. What we were able to do for each of the components of delivery care intervention was to analyze exactly why. In this particular case, I'm talking about something that without doubt improved, but it could have not been improving. And what we wanted to know was exactly why. And one of the things that matters in this is the context. Somebody was saying, one size doesn't fit all. That is the point. And I show you at the very beginning how different indicators, different countries, in what stage they were. So we look at context. We look at the mechanisms. You trigger in that context an intervention. And some, for example, training is delivered to a community that is going to take care of those moms in the delivery room. It was effective. The training was effective. The people understood the training. There is a reasoning there, an attitude. We cannot measure exactly the motivation, but people were reporting that they understood how much better this was, and they had the motivation to work and use what they learned. So this intervention was used, it was adopted as it was intended, and we have a good outcome. We did this with every little piece of delivery with care in the case of Belize. As you can see here, different intervention components. We were looking at what was the context, it was favorable or not, and we did the same with antenatal care in Honduras. Many things went well. That doesn't mean there is no room for improvement. So the idea of doing evaluations is checking exactly where we are, right? And we were, Donald was saying before, what we learned from here, how we keep on going. In Chiapas, antenatal care with quality, big improvement. 57%, it was 32, great. Do we want it to stay in 57%? Well, probably not. We want to do better. postpartum care with quality, from 13 to 37, big impact as well. Again, can be better, definitely. What other things we found were, time goes fast. I'm going to try to accelerate. Direct technical assistance. Everybody was mentioning this before. We found that it was really, really very important component. There were many things that were learned, and in some cases, asking for more of it. Somebody was, a colleague from Honduras, somebody was mentioning what we said here. The training provided practical skills, implemented robust self-evaluation. There was an understanding of the process of monitoring what we are doing and doing it better and thinking when something fails, how we can make it better. That was the community involvement in reviewing cases. That was when a mom died, somebody was saying, like, there is a revision of how exactly this happened, why it happened, and how we can prevent this from happening again. Okay. Phase 1, resource mobilization. We went to the field and found that people were very, very, very grateful for had the time because they didn't know exactly where they were, the resources that they had, the equipment that they had. So this first part, I'm thinking if I'm doing something new in another area, I would be very keen to have this time to organize, to set the foundational things that I need to then have those interventions and make them successful. You have a couple of quotes there. Very important because it began with the training of health personnel who provide care in maternal, neonatal, and child mortality, child health. Results-based financing, we were talking a lot about this. But one of the things that we found is that there was an initial important in the monetary incentive that then translated into intrinsic motivation. People start seeing the results, and the measurement allows them to keep track of how they were doing. And we had a lot of reports about how incentivized they were to do better, not because they were going to get anything, because they were not receiving the money themselves, but to do better, because they wanted to achieve better results. One thing that I want to also mention, and somebody said this, a person at the Ministry of Finance in Honduras was telling us, the issue of incentives is yes, like saying, yes, this is positive. However, the difficulty is how it is measured and what needs to be achieved so that the reimbursement, this is talking about all those hard negotiations the previous 2 years before the whole thing started to decide what are the right metrics here. So we cannot underestimate how difficult that part is. What challenges remain? What things we didn't see moving so well? Care coverage had challenges. In antenatal care, we found in the cases of Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, still over a third of the pregnant women don't go to antenatal care during the first trimester of their pregnancy. It's not that there were not improvement, but there is still quite a bit to do. El Salvador experienced some decrease from baseline to Operation 3, of course. COVID happened too, and that is impossible for us to know what is COVID or not, what would have happened without COVID. But what we find is that in general, there are some barriers that relate to context that are very important. In the places where we find that the coverage didn't improve as much as we hope. Cultural norms, privacy concerns prevent many of these women to go early for care, financial constraints to get there, and security considerations. There are parts of the country where security considerations, meaning gangs and things like that, prevent people from moving as much as they would like, or moving freely, or moving alone, and then coordination with the family is a challenge. We also found something that was mentioned before. We had in some places, personnel shortage and a lot of turnover. When working with the communities, what seems to be very, very important is building trust, is that they know that it's Alicia, the community health worker that goes there. There is building all that. When there is a lot of turnover, that gets lost, so it brings a challenge. The other area that we identified is in children health. We see some improvements, not everywhere, but some, but they are not at the level of other things. So more work needs to be done here. You have here vaccines, deworming, micronutrients for countries that have only second operation and also for the countries that go to third. But you see that these are not at the same level of improvement. We try to understand a little bit what was going on here with the data that we had from the countries where we were able to collect qualitative data. Still a little bit unclear. The workers say that they did have the resources, they were offering the service, even during COVID, many positive things. However, we don't see, of course there are exceptions. You can see there in Belize, the vaccination, the MMR is improving constantly from baseline to Operation 3. But still, there is room here for child health to improve. Limited sustainability is always the big thing, with the big difficult thing with interventions. We have seen a lot of parts of Salud Mesoamérica being sustained, but some did not. It's difficult to plan for sustainability when you have many countries at different levels. A lot of time went by. Different administrations, a lot of turnover, different ideas from the policymaker about what is right, what is wrong, and so on. So actually, it's a lot what this sustainability achieved. But here, see that one of the things that came as more important was the staff turnover. People changing affected knowledge. New administration comes and everybody is like shift around who is in the hospital. This matters a lot for continuity. Affected knowledge is affected that level of skills, affected the teamwork, the system. Sometimes it was mentioned the monetary resources for equipment to maintain. I mean, you make everything work in phase 1. 10 years later, probably the incubator needs maintenance. So despite this, there are a lot of examples of things that were maintained. Belize even expanded to other places. The quality improvement has expanded to all hospitals in non-communicable disease. El Salvador, improvements with cancer results that are delivered in a timely manner. Honduras, antenatal visits with quality that have been sustained. So still can be better than it is. People want to know, what is the summary of the indicators? This is a very difficult one because we have many countries, many indicators, many periods. We made a basic indicator. Imagine that every time that I measure the indicator, we have a positive change from baseline to second, from second to third. I measure all that. Let's say we are looking at Chiapas. In all the indicators, the maximum that they could have reached is 18 points if every change is a positive change. If changes are negative, I'm going to discount 1 point. If they don't change, I'm not adding, not subtracting anything. So the maximum is 18. They managed to get 14 of those points. And I do the same thing with all the countries. It's rough, it's an indicator, but it gives you an idea how the countries did. I do this with the time series, looking at the evolution of the indicators. Much more difficult is to summarize the impact evaluations. This is not even all the indicators that we have. But what we did was to use the colors and show you for sure everything that you see there in green, and there are some very large numbers, as you can see, 49, I was talking about that in Honduras, 32, 27. those are positive and statistically very significant changes. In red, I have the negative ones. There were some of those. What we have in white, grayish, sorry, that is because we did different colors, are things that tend to be positive in general, but statistically we don't have the power to be convinced that that is exactly a positive number and it's different from a zero known change, okay? Gives you a little bit of an idea of summary. I know it's a lot to handle, but let's conclude. High variance in results across countries and indicators. The starting point for the countries was very different, but overall, we tend to see improvement in the quality of care, very big improvement in quality of care, more than what we see in coverage. There are many good results, given what I was saying at the very beginning. The modest investment we're talking about. It's not like, oh, they changed the system because I came here with billions of dollars. What led to improvement? In terms of improving quality of care, the resources matter, but also trainings, having systems, very clear protocols of what I'm supposed to do, what I'm not supposed to do, and how to get organized in a systematic way, including workspace organization. The monitoring, the ability to have a metric is important. The self-assessments, and they manage to get motivation from these health workers. In terms of coverage, improvements when we have very intense community outreach. These populations are a little bit harder to reach. So intense work there, trust building, work close with the families. If I were to take this to another place, let's say, what I would bring with me. In terms of components, definitely I do believe in the system of incentives. I think that that can translate and trickle down to lower levels and make the beginning of the motivation. Focus on outcomes and measurement was key here, and people were aware of the outcomes and measurements. I'm proud of them. Direct technical assistance, absolutely key, essential to have. And that initial mobilization of resources, get prepared first. To have the appropriate coordination agency, that was the role of the IDB here. It couldn't have happened without that. You cannot just go and say, like, do it, throw the money. You have to have that coordination, and that was essential here. And of course, the commitment of the countries, the policymakers, all of you working together with the donors and the coordinating with IDB in this particular case is essential. Nothing that the country doesn't want to happen is going to happen because somebody in Washington decides that it would be great to happen. And I have seen that in a lot of evaluations. You go with your intervention, leave, the next day it's like, okay, 5 years later we're exactly the same. This is not the case here because there is commitment and working together within the system. So I'm going to stop there and give it some time for questions.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you so much. Behind these numbers are people. People whose lives have been improved. People whose lives have been saved. People whose lives you've touched. Everyone in this room has a connection to this great initiative. And we want to say these are the people like Santos Olga.
Todas las semanas salgo a recorrer las comunidades y hago visitas casa a casa para ver cómo están las familias. Hoy estoy en camino a una comunidad rural que queda a unos 13 kilómetros de donde vivo. Ahí vamos a encontrarnos con doña Teresa y don Jacobo en la unidad de salud de la comunidad.
Mi nombre es Teresa López. He sido partera desde muchos años. Yo mismo tuve mis hijos en la casa No había partera, no había centro de salud, no había clínica en el Cisne, no había centro de salud, no había.
Bueno, ahorita también vamos a ir a visitar a lo que es a esta muchacha Santo Olga Díaz. Olga es una joven de la comunidad indígena que vive con su hija de 4 años. Olga es un ejemplo. Cuando Olga tenía apenas 12 años, su mamá quedó embarazada y lamentablemente falleció por una complicación en el embarazo. Claro, en aquel entonces esto no era algo extraño para estas comunidades de difícil acceso a los servicios de salud. Por la larga distancia, pues sucedían estas cosas. Buenas. ¿Cómo ha estado, Olga? Permiso, ¿puedo pasar? Bueno, permiso.
Pues mi mamá se murió cuando ella tuvo el parto. Ella falleció por quedarse en casa, porque era una tragedia antigua que no había carros para ir para el hospital. Y ella se quedó en la casa y ella falleció. Y cuando ella falleció yo tenía 12 años. Fue una historia muy triste para mí. Me tocó dejar la escuela porque no había quien por mis hermanos. Yo era la mayor de ellos, yo tuve que mantenerlos. Y por eso ya ahora cuando a mí se me dio la oportunidad de formar una familia, yo mejor salí para el hospital a tener mi parto allá, porque no quería repetir lo mismo que le pasó a mi mamá.
Yo recibí a Olga en sus controles y ella ha sido puntual y muy obediente.
Pues cuando fue al primer control antes de los 3 meses, me pusieron una estrellita en el carnet y seguí hasta que llegué a los 9 meses. Y después me dijeron que tenía que ir a tener al hospital y yo me fui. Y al venir de allá me chequearon a los 4 días. Me dieron 5 estrellas porque asistí a los controles. Asistí 5 controles. Después me dieron el diploma.
Santos Olga es una madre estrella. Madre Estrella es un programa que implementamos para incentivar a las embarazadas a realizar los controles prenatales, a realizarse exámenes, que el parto ocurra en un centro de salud con atención de personal calificado, que haya un control luego del parto, tanto para la madre y el hijo. Cada vez que cumplen con un control o actividad se les da una estrella y cuando completan las 5 se les da un reconocimiento y esto tiene una motivación especial para las madres.
Costaba mucho y ahora todo está fácil. Se terminó la batalla, mire, de ir lejos. Pero ahora sí yo me alegro que estas embarazadas tienen donde ir. Ahora todos están en control, todos están puntual, todos vienen a la pesa. Allí no vayan.
La realidad ha cambiado. Comunidades donde antes teníamos un promedio de 10 a 15 muertes maternas por año, hasta el momento tenemos 0. Y eso es gracias a todas las acciones que hemos implementado. Este cambio fue posible por el trabajo y esfuerzo de muchas personas a lo largo de toda la red que trabajan para cambiar la realidad, sabiendo que sí se puede. Sí se puede cambiar la forma de planificar y trabajar para acercar los servicios de salud a las poblaciones que más lo necesitan.
Next is we are going to invite Sebastián, Alicia, and Emma to join us, and we have a special guest who is going to join us via Zoom to hear some reflections. So you'll all be on the stage as part of the panel. If he was in person, he'd be here with the panel. That's why we want to make sure the panels are up. So we have Sebastián, Alicia, and Emma. And we're going to bring in Dr. Gary Darmstadt, who will be introduced by Sebastian. We make sure we have the Zoom appear with our tech folks. And they can hear us. All right, over to you, Sebastian.
Gary, can you hear us all right? Yes? Okay. Can you hear us? Welcome. Well, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Gary, for joining us and welcome. Just by way of very short introduction, Gary is the Associate Dean for Maternal and Child Health and the Professor of Neonatal and Developmental Medicine at Stanford University's School of Medicine, and he kindly offered to join us with some reflections. So Gary, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. I thank the IDB, especially Emma Iriarte, for this opportunity. I'm really sorry that I can't be there to share in these super rich discussions and personal interactions that you're having. I see a number of treasured friends there. I wish I could be there to touch your skin and interact with you personally, but I'm pleased to be able to share these remarks. I first became involved with Salud Mesoamérica when I was at Gates Foundation, and Jaime Sepulveda led the Gates Foundation commitment to this initiative. And at that time, Foundation leadership agreed to fund 2 grand experiments in innovations to achieve impact at scale. Salud Mesoamérica was one, and the Ananya project statewide in Bihar, India was another. And I'll reference that initiative in some of my comments. But these are 2 of the most ambitious and rigorously evaluated maternal and child health programs that I'm aware of. And the foundation investment at that time in Mesoamerica was quite unusual in its size, in its long timeline of about 10 years, in the very robust programmatic data collection, the investment in systems, and in a region. So here are some of my reflections. I think that the initial 2-year phase of investment that was focused on system readiness for program implementation was extremely important. This was an unusually robust investment in preparing the system for improved performance. Often donor-supported programs kind of rush to implement, and the time and resources are minimized up front. We tend to minimize formative research, the development of clear targets, a learning agenda, a really clear theory of change with a linked evaluation framework. These are all de-emphasized and sometimes sacrificed, and thereby foregoing the opportunity to learn. In the Gates Foundation funded program in Bihar, a little bit different approach was taken from Mesoamerica. The initial phase was focused more on developing and testing technical and managerial innovations, whereas Mesoamerica initiative viewed and placed higher priority on planning and on measurement, and saw these as essential interventions in and of themselves. And this really paid off. You've heard a lot already about the heavy emphasis on measurement, including concurrent comparison and intervention areas. And I just must say that the maintenance of a concurrent comparison design in a program context is really challenging, really unusual, and takes great commitment. And this is really to be commended. But these data ultimately are really powerful in policy dialogue. Key to learning, the initiative developed a program theory of change up front from the very beginning. And this was aimed to align goals with targets, to create incentives to reach those targets, and to establish a strong measurement system to track progress and enable learning from successes as well as shortcomings in achieving those targets. But with time, this theory of change had to evolve. It evolved from initially a relatively simplistic, overarching theory centered on incentives to a more grounded theory that sought to understand how do you incite change in health systems, organization, and performance. For example, using system dynamics, organizational change approaches, as well as guidelines and protocols for the provision of care. I think it would be really powerful if it were possible to get some measure of the strength of evaluation or strength of implementation and relate that to changes in indicators. This was approached with a very rich qualitative assessment that was done, but policy dialogue could potentially be strengthened if this could be further quantified. We've talked a lot about the results-based financing and how this was effective in generating the political commitment that's critical to program success, and later for policy dialogue and translation. However, during the program, it was essential that there was a transition in motivation, derived at the higher level from results-based financing, to lasting efforts on the ground to achieve goals. And programmatic achievement was really primarily achieved through non-financial mechanisms such as supportive supervision, greater involvement and collaboration between all levels of the system. There's a huge amount to learn from this very unique experiment in motivation. This initiative was very careful to address the continuum of care, meeting people where they're at, from preconception on through childcare. And they did this across the entire health system continuum, from policymakers, both health and finance, and healthcare providers at all levels, tertiary to primary to community. In the end, it's the same care providers working across the continuum, but often this is not really taken advantage of, missing opportunities and creating program designs that don't make much sense. For example, a woman bringing their newborn for a health checkup and then needing a separate appointment for family planning. And this initiative addressed and eliminated these kinds of incongruities. This was a regional initiative which had some powerful advantages. Certainly the sharing of data served to stimulate healthy competition across countries, within countries, and this approach can be applied really to any unit of implementation. In Bihar, this was done at the district level. Secondly, there was pooling of resources and economies of scale, creating a coordination unit that helped support multiple countries doing things like joint procurement. The Regional Malaria Elimination Initiative grew out of and built on these lessons from Mesoamerica and has even a stronger regional approach, including cross-border interventions. So I think there's a really unique opportunity here to unpack the value of regional investment and to provide insights on criteria for selecting an optimal unit for programming and for investment. This initiative took real care to balance the care in facilities and in communities. And I would note in Bihar, disparity tended to widen during program implementation, specifically for indicators that were dependent on access to healthcare facility, to healthcare care in health facilities. In Mesoamerica, sociocultural norms were studied, and this knowledge was applied to adjust the health interventions, for example, through social network studies. Unfortunately, when Spain had to lead the initiative, it took a bit of a toll on the social accountability component of the initiative, and this emphasizes the importance of continual alignment of donor investments with program implementation. Evaluations, and we just heard this, suggest that factors involved in improving care quality, things like training, standards, et cetera, differed from factors in care coverage like community outreach, trust building, working with families. It was important that this initiative took the view that investments in quality and coverage should be made simultaneously from the very beginning, and they should be mutually reinforcing. And this is providing very important learning for how to create synergy in simultaneously improving quality and coverage during scale-up. Just a word about technical assistance. This was a key catalytic factor, enabled really rich learning about how this can be done successfully, sustainably, and at scale. For one, we learned that technical assistance needs to address specific issues and adapt to the local context and not be provided from the outset as a package of previously agreed solutions. The technical assistance needs to strengthen health system capabilities and to be sure to not overshadow the Ministry of Health. This sometimes happens, leading to short-term success at the expense of sustainability and scale. And the IDB really navigated this exceptionally well. And third, there needs to be a strategic direction and linkage made between the various components of technical assistance, and this needs to be coordinated ideally from the country level. And this is something that SMI really navigated well. There's some real opportunity here in the rich qualitative data to draw out local examples of where actions were linked to improved outcomes, and I look forward to seeing these kinds of case studies coming out more and more from this initiative. And one thing that's important in reviewing these results to remember is that this initiative targeted the 20% most impoverished municipalities. This was a very ambitious but important undertaking. In Bihar, improvements in indicators were driven largely by changes in the least marginalized subgroup of population by wealth and caste. And we saw essentially no change in indicators among the most marginalized. Reach to the most marginalized with interventions designed to address their needs has to be intentional. And this initiative understood that from the very beginning. This initiative targeted the most vulnerable, initially conceived around the idea that there were large health gaps to be addressed within these populations. But what do we do going forward? Do we continue to target? And if so, what segments of the population? Do you keep targeting the poorest 20%, the same 20%? Do you start to pick intersecting vulnerabilities? Do you start to focus more on a set of lagging indicators and target the poorest performing municipalities? And I also wonder what happened to social mobility among those poorest 20%. Did they migrate upward economically as a result of this initiative? And on a related topic, in Bihar, we did a lot of geospatial analysis. And if this could be done here, it could add some really rich learning and insight into local factors driving or impeding change and leading to greater precision in programming. And then just one final thought, that ultimately macro factors end up being extremely important. We saw at the country level that some countries performed really well, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico notably, and we have really strong difference data to show that. For Belize, we have some strong time trend data, but then some other countries showed less improvement. In Panama, for example, program implementation was found to be challenging in part. The engagement around financial incentives didn't seem to be quite as strong. And in that location, the focus was almost entirely on indigenous communities, and they had a long history of troublesome interactions with the government that were hard to overcome. In Nicaragua, it appeared that the government-led implementation occurred both within the intervention area, but then spilled quite a bit into the comparison areas, and this appeared to dilute the impact measures. But furthermore, the economic and political context tended to deteriorate over time with this initiative. And finally, I couldn't help but notice the tremendous impact on newborn health interventions. This was particularly exciting and successful. This is key to achieving SDG 3.2. So thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts. It's really been a great honor for me to be involved in this initiative and to learn with you along this really inspiring journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary, for putting what the entire initiative and the impacts into some perspective and reflecting on this, and also Alicia for presenting the main findings of your report. We now have some time for questions and answers, and I understand there's two ways of doing it. First one already. Two ways of doing it. One is the Mentimeter. Do we have that active? So I think you can submit questions through the Mentimeter, which our colleagues will read out loud, and we can just take questions in the room as well, of course. So maybe we'll just get started. I think you already had your hand up. Can we have a microphone? Just up here. Thank you. And feel free to direct your question to any of the panelists and, of course, to Gary as well. I will redirect as necessary.
Sure. Alicia, first of all, I'm deeply impressed with the quality of the evaluation NORC and the University of Chicago did under your leadership. I want to compliment Ferdinando and Emma and Roberto Tapia and Ricardo for having decided to change horses in the middle of the river, so to speak, having changed the evaluator for this final phase. So it took courage, it took vision, and I think it was the right thing to do. Question for you. To what extent were you able to use and calibrate, standardize the evaluations performed by IHME to this last evaluation? Was it a hard act to follow? What was well done? What was less well done in previous evaluations? So I would love to have your comments. And Gary, if you're listening, thanks for being a great successor of mine at the Gates Foundation, and thank you for the great work and tremendous talk right now. Thank you, Alicia.
First, thank you very much for your kind words. It was a challenge, but we are delighted we had this opportunity to work with IDB on this. We used the data collected by the previous evaluators, the quantitative data, but we didn't use their evaluations at all. So we started from scratch, from the baseline on, and redid absolutely every single number that I share with you. So it's a short answer. It's like, I don't know what they did. I do know that the data that was collected looks good quality. It took quite a while and a lot of effort from my quantitative team, hours and hours of putting those numbers together, but we did it all over again. So, and that is what I show you. So it's like if they would have done anything before, rather than collecting the data.
Emma.
Sí, a mí me gustaría hacer un comentario al respecto de esta pregunta, sabiendo lo que discutimos con los países. Entonces es importante este comentario, me parece. Si todos recordamos, aquí hay dos tipos de medición, ¿sí? Una medición que fue de línea base, o sea, una medición de línea base con todos los indicadores y con el estado de aquel momento en el 2012. Y luego, cada 2-3 años, una medición para verificar si los países han cumplido su meta, ¿sí? No es de eso que estamos hablando, ¿sí? Ahorita de lo que estamos hablando es de que en cada medición hay información no solo para que los donantes desembolsaran el tramo de desempeño cuando era correspondiente, sino que esa misma medición ha servido en este momento para que NORC haga una evaluación de toda la iniciativa. ¿Qué quiere decir eso? Que ellos tomaron todas esas 50,000 encuestas y más de 1,000 unidades de salud, lo pusieron todo junto y agregaron la parte cualitativa para entender toda la iniciativa. Entonces, el valor, el rigor de la medición de desempeño no se cuestiona, ¿sí? Todos los datos son buenos, como dijo Alicia, pero tenían dos propósitos. En cada momento, entregar el desempeño, y en este momento, que es donde ellos entran, es juntar todo, además añadiendo la parte cualitativa para entender lo que funcionó, lo que no funcionó y por qué.
Thank you, Emma. We had a question from Mentimeter.
From the audience, one of the questions is, can the contamination effect be explained in more detail? How is COVID-19 effect measured or controlled?
The contamination effect in more detail, yes. What normally happens when you are trying to measure the impact of an intervention is that you try to have something similar to what would have happened without the intervention. So we use what we call controls. Normally, in short, small pilots, in randomized controlled trials, you can have a control that is business as usual, nobody touches, is pristine all the time until the end line. What happens is that in regular life, when you are working at scale, what happens in that control is not something that the IDB can control so easily. If I see that the doctor next door is doing something that is brilliant and I want to adopt it, I adopt it, and yeah, that came from Salud Mesoamérica perhaps, or somebody came to help me from whatever, another foundation, a local NGO or something. That is contamination. If that contamination is similar to what Salud Mesoamérica has been created, what happens is that it makes my control move in the same way that Salud Mesoamérica is doing because of Salud Mesoamérica. That's why I'm saying that is making smaller that effect that I can find. This happens because it's a very long, the end line is very long, many years after, so many things can happen. It's difficult to keep it untouched. That is contamination. And what was the other part? Contamination and COVID. Well, COVID affected all of us, right? I mean, COVID affected moms that didn't want to go to the health center for vaccines because they were terrified, like we were all terrified at some point that if we would breathe outside our door, we would die immediately. I had COVID in Buenos Aires. I didn't have COVID. I experienced the pandemic in Buenos Aires. We were not allowed to leave the home unless we had a special permit during I don't know how many months. It was just absolutely insane. This happens, the centers, in many of the places where we collected qualitative data, the people said that they tried to keep the services. They were appointments made, you know, with less frequency, lower frequency, so people wouldn't get together, too many of them in a room and things like that. But they try. But it did interrupt it. People didn't want to open to the community health worker the door to come in, like, so probably they were shouting through the window or something. But it did have a change in what was happening. Many things kept on moving in a very positive direction. Some others didn't. The problem with something like COVID that is impacting everyone in this way, we don't have too many ways to separate what was COVID from maybe something else, other than trying to ask for the experience that people have during that period. And we know that it was very difficult, but I cannot really put a number. It would have been 20% worse, better, or something else. We cannot quantify in that way, that I would love to do. In some other cases, you can quantify, in education, we can do something like this. But in these changes that we see in Salud Mesoamérica, definitely there was an impact. Definitely health systems were extremely affected in this region and in every region I can imagine. And in many places, vaccination levels, for example, did not went back to the previous pre-COVID levels. And still they are low.
Maybe just to add, I think the fact that the approach or the lessons from Salud Mesoamérica spilled into these comparison areas is a good sign. No? That's a sign of success.
That is a good sign.
It's a challenge for the evaluation,
yes,
but it's a success of the program in many ways.
Absolutely.
And I think similarly, many of the approaches implemented through Salud Mesoamérica would represent what we would now call health systems resilience improvements.
Exactly.
Maybe the jury is out of how COVID worked or how these areas fared relative to the counterfactual, but this is sort of the generic recommendations for improving resilience against pandemics and other kind of shocks. Mm-hmm. We have another question over there. Yes, please.
Gracias. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Diana Pava, soy la directora general del Instituto Nacional de Salud de Colombia. Un placer compartir con todos ustedes hoy. Quisiera de pronto agradecer a todo el equipo y a la doctora Alicia porque la economía de la salud es uno de los pilares más fundamentales para nuestros países, porque muchas de las decisiones que nosotros tomamos en salud pública dependen de los costos de estas intervenciones y no sabemos cuánto nos cuesta, sobre todo en temas de gastos de bolsillo, así lo denominamos nosotros en Colombia, y es cuánto le cuesta a la gente venir desde la atención primaria en salud a 2 o 3 horas del centro de salud, desde su finca o desde su granja. Entonces quisiera pronto preguntar, doctora Alicia, felicitarla por ese trabajo tan maravilloso. Creo que esta iniciativa podría llegar a tener ejemplos similares para nuestros países de cómo costear esos gastos. De pronto, si hay alguna orientación, agradezco mucho. Gracias.
Bueno, ¿qué hago? ¿En español? Sí, está bien. Bueno, una de las cosas muy salientes es que yo decía, no quiero minimizar cuántos son, 130 millones de dólares más 43. Sí, suma. Pero son muchos países, son muchos años. La inversión es modesta. En porcentaje de lo que se gasta en salud en nuestros países, esto es pequeñito. Y la diferencia y el retorno económico que tienen esas inversiones en la salud de esas mamás, esos pequeñitos, los recién nacidos y los niños después, es enorme. O sea que si yo hago, esto no lo hicimos en este caso en particular, pero si yo hago un descuento de la mejora en vida, ni lo pienso. Es pequeño, se tiene que hacer, es nada. Nos gastamos esta cantidad en pavadas que hay que parar. ¿Cómo era? Stop the stupid. Ok, all the time. Tendríamos que hacer un análisis un poco de cómo gastamos. Pero esto es una inversión que yo no necesito hacer la cuenta, es una buena inversión. Después podemos hablar un poquito más, no sé en qué cosa particular podemos pensar en Colombia, pero definitivamente estas son inversiones que sí valen la pena.
Thank you so much, Alicia. We have another question from the room here.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm Carlos Gutierrez. I'm the Regional External Engagement Officer, UNFPA for Latin America and the Caribbean. Y si me permiten, voy a seguir entonces en español. 3 preguntas, creo yo, muy concretas. Los 4 han mencionado el valor de esta plataforma público-privada para avanzar. Sin embargo, me gustaría conocer, digamos, qué lecciones aprendidas o reflexiones hay para mantener ese compromiso en la primera fase, convencer de la importancia de esta iniciativa y mantenerlo en los próximos años. En el UNFPA estamos lanzando para la región desde hace un año una iniciativa con unas características similares y me gustaría conocer un poco las reflexiones de ustedes. Emma, quizás ver si en 10 años puedo estar en una posición como la tuya, celebrando con socios resultados importantes. Entonces, ya que estaban promoviendo la mentoría más temprano, me encantaría escuchar un poco sobre esto. Un poco combinado a la reflexión que hacía nuestra compañera de Colombia, el UNFPA ha estado avanzando justamente en metodologías de cálculo de impacto socioeconómico, en este caso el embarazo adolescente. 13.000 millones de dólares le cuesta a 15 países en nuestra región. Más allá de entrar, digamos, a los elementos concretos del costo, siendo que las autoridades del área de finanzas son clave para esta iniciativa, ¿cuáles fueron los argumentos que utilizaron para tenerlos allí presentes, digamos, como colaboradores estratégicos para avanzar esta iniciativa? Y la última pregunta, ¿cómo entra la partería tradicional? ¿Cómo entró la partería tradicional dentro de la ecuación de la iniciativa? ¿Cómo fue el diálogo entre, digamos, el sistema formal de salud para incluirles y reconocer su aporte? Gracias.
Emma,
Well played.
Son tuyas. Yo te ayudo cuando te canses.
Ya me olvidó la primera.
Partner, private public private.
Yo creo que un tema que fue crítico es el habernos reunido alrededor de lo que importaba en ese momento. Y cuando uno empieza por los consensos y no por los disensos, es más fácil iniciar la conversación. Y aquí los que estamos acá, los jefes de equipo, especialistas de salud del banco en los países, los equipos de países, nuestro liderazgo y los donantes, recordarán las discusiones de la primera fase, donde en la primera fase, y aquí podemos escribir libros todos de todas las historias que tenemos que contar, la primera fase no era de system readiness en el diseño. La primera fase era medir resultados entre los 2 y los 3 primeros años, medir resultados. Y fue una discusión, si ustedes recuerdan, muy fuerte, porque en la experiencia de trabajo de todos los que estamos aquí, se requiere primero algunas condiciones, no perfectas, porque si esperamos las condiciones perfectas nunca vamos a hacer nada, pero hay ciertas cosas que teníamos que tener listas. Entonces, alrededor del consenso del resultado, yo creo que es del objetivo que nos mueve a todos, creo que es crítico. Y de ahí movernos hasta ir solventando parte por parte los temas. Una vez que la confianza, que la discusión de problemas con los donantes, con los ministros, que al principio fue muy dura porque uno no quiere, dependiendo de los estilos de gerencia y de trabajo, mostrar cuáles son los problemas porque parece que no estamos haciendo nuestro trabajo. Pero en realidad discutir los problemas es porque estamos haciendo nuestro trabajo y queremos resolverlos. Entonces requiere todo ese cambio también de gerencia. Ahora, ¿cómo mantener esto? Es la primera vez en mi vida profesional en estos últimos 12 años con el comité de donantes y con niveles de liderazgo de los ministerios habían reuniones, óiganme, no le puedo decir diarias, pero semanales, ¿sí? No de reporte, de discusión técnica. Explíquenos cómo van a hacer esto, qué es lo que están haciendo, pero más importante, el intercambio y la construcción conjunta de lo que la Fundación Gates podía traer de India, de África y de otras regiones donde estaban aprendiendo otros temas y el establecimiento de las redes de conocimiento importantes que alimentaron Salud Mesoamérica, así como Salud Mesoamérica alimentó también eso. O con la Fundación Carlos Slim, con una experiencia en México, que es uno de nuestros países de la región, donde tenían avanzados temas de, por ejemplo, que hoy lo hablaba el doctor Tapia, de temas de tecnología digital y de atención primaria en salud, cómo aprovechar cosas que ellos ya estaban haciendo, como un diplomado que tenían en salud materno y neonatal, que al principio yo misma le decía al doctor y a Ricardo Mújica aquí, les decía, no sé cómo vamos a hacer esto en estas zonas que no hay internet, porque en todas esas zonas había gente de nuestros proveedores de salud que tenían 10 años de no recibir nada de refrescamiento. Y fue un éxito porque llegó a todo lado e hicieron un esfuerzo de tener disponible offline el diplomado y esos temas no están considerados en el partenariado inicialmente, en el asocio. Entonces, lo que quiero resaltar con esto es que otro gran cambio para mí en relación a la visión a partenariados es el tema de donante y recipiente, de pasar de donante y recipiente a trabajo conjunto colaborativo, a corresponsables. Número 2, de pasar de entregar reportes y rendir cuentas al donante a rendirnos cuentas todos, porque aquí todos teníamos algo que hacer. El banco tenía su papel, con todas las oficinas, los especialistas de salud que aquí están también sentados al lado de sus contrapartes de los ministerios, los representantes, nuestro liderazgo, y nosotros también teníamos que rendir cuentas de la tarea que nos correspondía. Pero también a los donantes les pedimos cuentas y los países pidieron cuentas a los donantes de muchos temas, ¿eh? y a sus mismas autoridades. Entonces, estoy dándoles ejemplos que no tienen que ver con financiamiento, ¿sí? Y para mí ese es un primer tema para mantener y sostener los asocios, porque hay recursos que, en mi opinión, y claro que podemos discutir eso, el dinero es muy importante y siempre necesario cuando uno quiere innovar y hacer cosas diferentes, pero hay recursos que a veces pueden ser incluso más estratégicos que el financiamiento en sí. Con la Fundación Gates hemos continuado trabajando fuera ya de la iniciativa, en una iniciativa que yo espero que Ethan nos pueda comentar en algún momento en el panel, que está también alimentando con los datos de la iniciativa y con la forma de trabajo otros temas en otros lados. Entonces, para mí es el involucramiento, el tema de la confianza, de la discusión de problemas para solucionarnos, ese ambiente de aprendizaje, yo lo puedo decir y creo que lo podemos comentar en algún momento, no solo fue para los países, no solo fue para el banco, yo creo que también para los donantes hay otro tipo de aprendizajes que ellos pueden compartir y mantener esa relación, pero es una relación porque estamos en el mismo trabajo, solo que con diferentes gentes y con diferentes países. Y el tener esa red de la que uno puede alimentarse con nuevas intervenciones y con nuevas maneras es fabuloso. Y solo quedamos a una pregunta, hablamos de las otras luego.
I was going to say, I hate to interrupt. I see the clock ticking, I see hungry faces, and I think we're up for lunch in just a moment. Oh, sorry, Gary, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make a quick comment about the question on midwifery. We've been hearing how throughout the initiative there was a commitment and a respect for local solutions. And I had the chance to be out in the field several times, and it seemed to me that midwifery grew out of local solutions and working across the continuum of care in a way that made sense to people. So, you know, when you're bringing your newborn in for a postnatal checkup, you didn't need a separate appointment now for family planning. It made sense to people. And the midwife was providing that kind of continuous care. They were local and they were trusted. And I think that was a lot of the generation of interest in midwifery care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. Then let me maybe close and send you off for lunch in just a moment. Just to say, I think you know, the evaluation that NORC presented and the other learnings that we already heard about today, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to be learned about the experience so far, and then there's the learning agenda going forward. Like, what else are we going to do next? And I think those are really important issues, and there's still lots to do. So I think you're all invited to be part of that agenda too. Thank you so much.